I'm gonna play the good part again, just so you know. it, it's um it's kind of not quite locatable with the regular tools, but if you can see the time signature up there, it's in between 229 and 230, and I experience it as a a whole, as a small abyss. But the size of it, the smallness of that opening or aperture is kind of irrelevant once you go through it. And it becomes kind of massive and kind of expansive. And well, there's, I'm sure, that it could be easily said that I make too much of it, and I'm sure I do. Um, but this is the text from which I will attempt to begin to approach this question of nothingness. Okay? So, and you just have to listen to it. It's the part that makes your body lean. Okay? Do you hear what I'm talking about? It's that, it's just that little, it's just like this little moment, this little bit of emptiness that Blackwell feeds Cherry to set everything up. It's like it's just this little social space. I think that black music is so filled with these little moments of emptiness, little slight moments of nothingness, that you could almost say that this is the animus, um, the driving impulse of the music. And and it's, I think I'm beginning to understand something about it, but I could never have even, there, the only possible way that I could ever have begun to understand. I thought that Mackie and Baraka had kind of set up the conditions that would make it possible for me to try to understand everything I wanted to understand about the music. But y'all opened up this whole other thing. See, so now it's got to be, we got to work through this now. Okay, so, or I have to. I guess y'all have to too. Um, okay. It's terrible to have come from nothing but the sea, which is nowhere, navigable only in its constant auto dislocation. The absence of solidity seems to demand some other ceremony of hailing that will have been carried out on some more exalted frequency. This is exacerbated by the venal refusal of a general acknowledgement of the crime, which is in any case impossible, raising the question of whether the only way adequately to account for the horror of slavery and the brutality of the slaver, the only way to be, in Professor Sexton's words, a witness rather than a spectator, is to begin by positing the absolute degradation of the enslaved. This is not a trick question. It's not merely rhetorical. If the slave is, in the end and in essence, nothing, what remains is the necessity of an investigation of that nothingness. What is the nothingness, which is to say the blackness of the slave, that it is not reducible to what they did, though what they did is irreducible in it? This is a question concerning the undercommon inheritance of another world, which is given in and given as fantasy in the hold. Those who are called into being by the desire for another call relinquish the fantastic when they make the choice to leave the hold behind. In resistance to such departure, we linger in the advent, in the brutal interplay of advent and enclosure. This is a quote. They resumed paddling and soon began to sing. After a while, she could hear, at first faintly, then with increasing clarity, other sounds. The waves slapping the hull of the big ship, its timbers creaking. Then came the muffled screaming in a strange language. The ship grew larger and more terrifying with every vigorous stroke of the paddles. The smells grew stronger and the sounds louder, crying and wailing from one quarter and low plaintive singing from another. The anarchic noise of children given an underbeat by hands drumming on wood. The odd comprehensible word or two wafting through, some asking for many, water, another laying a curse, appealing to Maibika, spirits. As the canoe men maneuvered their vessel up alongside, she saw dark faces, framed by small holes in the side of the ship above the waterline, staring intently. Above her, dozens of black women and children and a few red-faced men peered over the rail. They had seen the attempted escape on the sandbar. The men had cutlasses and barked orders in harsh, raspy voices. She had arrived at the slave ship. End quote. Her name is Hortense. Her name is Norbessie. Her name is B. The black chant she hears is old and new to her. She is unmoored. She is ungendered. Her mother is lost. Exhausted, exhaustive maternity is her pedagogical imperative. Consent not to be a single being. What's required is some attempt to think the relation between fantasy and nothingness. Emptiness, dispossession in the hold, consent not to be a single being in the hold. An intimacy given most emphatically and erotically in a moment of something that, for lack of a better word, we call silence. A sub-oceanic feeling of emptiness, common particle in the double expanse. 2 minutes and 29 seconds to 2 minutes and 30 seconds, marking the in-betweenness and mobile location of the span, so we can consider that what is mistaken for silence can also be given in and as nothingness in its full transubstantiality. But also the compression and dispersion, the condensation and displacement of caged duration, the marking more emphatically of its beginning and end, and especially the concentrated air of its propulsion that shows up as waiting, Erwartung, embarrassment in our expectation, Blackwell's anticipatory pulse, the moment of nothingness, unhoused vacuity, matoikic vernacular, the rich materiality of the holds, the jugs, emptiness, its contents having fled in their remaining, fled as the remainder, the danger, the supplement. Blackwell offers Mu's impossible to understand black thing, the cherry thing, as a seriality of openings, a vestibular chain, a kind of spillway, as spillers might say. I have approached the Mu in Mutron through the opening of Marcus Rediker's The Slave Ship, his attempt to describe what might be called a birth into death, or an entrance into bare life, or raw life, but which I will insist, not despite, but precisely because of its being the blood-stained gate through which the radically non-analogous is entered, is the impure imminence of Undercommon's anoriginary refrain. Because the task of continually instigating this flown, recursive imagining demands the inhabitation of an architecture and its acoustic, an inhabitation given as if in approach from outside. What is required, and this is recited with such terrible beauty in the work of Professors Wilderson and Sexton, in echo of Lewis Gordon's, is not only to reside in an unlivability, an exhaustion that is always already given as foreshadowing afterlife, as a life in some absolute proximity and unbridgeable distance from the living death of subjection, but also to discover and to enter it. Mackey, in the preface to his all but unspeakably beautiful Splay Anthem, outlining the provenance and relationship between the book's serial halves, quote, each was given its impetus by a piece of recorded music from which it takes its title, the Dogon Song of the Andumbulu in one case, Don Cherry's Mu first part and Mu second part in the other. Speaks of Mu in relation to a circling or spiraling or ringing, this roundedness or rondo linking beginning and end, the wailing that accompanies entrance into an expulsion from sociality, that makes you wonder if music, which is not only music, is mobilized in the service of an eccentricity, a centrifugal force whose intimation Mackey also approaches, that marks sociality's ecstatic existence beyond beginning and end, ends and means. Forgive this long series of quotations from that preface, passages of which I am a prisoner, insofar as the range of Mu's phonemic, historical, and parageographical resonance get me to the elsewhere and elsewhen that I already inhabit, but which I have to keep learning to desire. Actually, if you forgive me, there will be no need to thank me. This is Mackey. Multi-instrumentalist Don Cherry, best known as a trumpeter, includes voice among the instruments used in the Mu albums and resorts to a sort of dove coo baby talk on one piece